All right, well, good morning. If you have your Bibles, if you would open to James chapter 1. Thank you all so much for your prayers for my family and I as we traveled to Colorado, not this past week, but the week before, and we were on our way back and praying for you all last Sunday, and thank you, Colton, for faithfully bringing the word to us last week. Such a blessing to have you here. And I know it was a blessing to those y'all were able to make it, but we're going to continue on in our study of the book of James and looking at another aspect of what Colton preached on last week. Colton laying the foundation of what godly wisdom looks like, and as we become exposed as God saves us, we realize that we don't have wisdom on our own. When Christ saves us, our eyes become open to the fact that so much of our lives is spent not in the wisdom of God, but in our own wisdom. And so we are in need of God to gift us with faith, that we then may come to Him for what we need for our daily living. And indeed, that is the call of God on us. Continually, not just that we would at one time come to Him and say, okay, God, I need some wisdom now because I can't figure this one out, and then the rest of our lives spent in, well, I've got this one handled, but rather that we would continually learn to come to Him by faith in order to receive what we need for all things. But there's another aspect I want to make sure that we are clear on before we move past this passage, because there are certain words in the Christian church that are often used, and in our English language we really only have one term to go with them, but it can mean so many different things. Like if you think, for instance, of love and how it's often used in our English language. And it's funny to me often, being an English major and kind of having studied literature and being a teacher and things like this, just how odd it is sometimes how we use a singular word or term for so many different meanings. Like you think of love, it seems so odd, and indeed it's odd around the world for places that actually do the right linguistic thing and come up with other terms for things, but it seems odd in our English language that you can love a burrito, you can love your dog, and you can love your wife. Seems like we should probably come up with something different there, doesn't it? So it's important that before we move on from this passage, that we clearly define what James is meaning when he says that we should ask, when we ask for wisdom, we should ask in faith without doubting. Because I don't know about you, but when I hear that, and James goes on to say that, listen, if you doubt, then you shouldn't expect to receive anything from the Lord. And if I were left to define doubt, how I would typically define doubt, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. In fact, I'm often going to come to the Lord and shouldn't expect anything because I have doubts at times. And I don't believe I have yet met the honest Christian who would say they have never had doubts. Whether it be a dark night of the soul, where we're struggling and we wonder whether or not God really has us. Whether it be something that we've seen in the Scriptures that seems to contradict what we had believed before or been taught before. Whether it just happens to be something we thought we had figured out and then come to find out that God has another way for us to approach a certain situation as we seek Him in His Word. And we doubt whether or not we really have this thing figured out, or whether we should go the way that God has prescribed for us to go. Indeed, the whole concept of faith is that we have not yet seen it. Faith is not going to last, which is why Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 said, listen, these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest is love. I believe one of the reasons why Paul says the greatest is love is that love is going to last forever. Faith and hope will not. There will be one day that we are hoping for, wherein faith will be unnecessary. Because we will see and we will know. and not need the faith that we have now. We will no longer have to hope because it will be fulfilled. It will be done. There will be nothing left to hope for. Love, however, will remain. So when James says we are to ask without doubting, what does he mean? Well, let's look at our text here. Starting in, let's go ahead and start in verse 2. Because we're going to see a contrast between the person in verses 2 through 4, and then the person in verses 5 through 8. So let's start at verse 2 of James chapter 1. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you face trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. If anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. So as we look at doubting, it's important that we begin to understand what James is meaning here. And if we look at the Greek word that he uses for doubt, it is rather someone who will debate, someone who will put up an argument against. It's not simply somebody who doesn't know and therefore wonders. It is not somebody who just doesn't have the knowledge, doesn't have the understanding, doesn't have the grasp of what is being told or what is being presented, but rather someone who would divide themselves from what is being stated, what is. This concept of doubting is someone who not only questions whether or not it's the right thing, but rather would want to set something in opposition. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. See, we have a problem. Our problem is a faith issue. We do not trust God over ourselves. We have a problem with that as human beings. You look all the way back to Genesis chapter 3 in the garden. They had a problem trusting that what God said was true. And their desire, indeed, their understanding that they could be like God, they ate of that fruit. We still struggle with that today. That is the default position of every single human being. We believe we know better. And so our doubt is not the doubting of faith that we just struggle to know what God is going to unfold, but rather it is we have a different position naturally. We have an argument to what God would call us to do and to be. This is the doubting that James is going to say, if this is our position, if we will not let go of our position, we should not suppose that God would answer us. But we play these games. Every single one of us, we play these games where we want to justify ourselves. And we do so most often when we look back at the times we were right. Right? We look back at the times that we were right and the times we got it figured out, the times that we planned it all out, we worked it all out, we had secured our happiness, we'd secured our comfort, we'd secured what we desired for ourselves, what felt good to us, and therefore we look back at what we have done, and that solidifies and justifies our understanding of our ability to be wise on our own. See, we have a problem when we come to God and we believe we have it figured out. That by our planning, that by our maneuvering, that by our amount of good deeds that we're now coming to cash in before God, that He ought to do what we want Him to do. He ought to give us what we ask of Him, because obviously we're amazing. We've got this thing figured out. We're nailing this. We just need a little bit of help in this other area that we just can't seem to get a grasp on. And we're happy to come to God, and in our minds, we take what we want from Him, and then we're good now. And God will just keep being good people. We'll keep going to church. We'll keep being nice most of the time, and at least out loud. We'll keep doing those things, and that should make God happy with us. Happy to have us on His team. The problem with that is we are opposed to God when we come in prayer in such a way. Because we show Him by our words and by our hearts that we don't want Him, we just need His stuff. We don't really want Him to be in control of our lives. We just want Him to allow us to feel good about our lives. So we're happy to come to Him for forgiveness. We don't want sanctification. We're happy to come to Him for a little bit of peace in a certain situation or to appease our conscience. We don't want to bear our cross. And so when we come to God doubting that He is actually God, as Colton pointed out last week, that when we come to Him, not believing that He is actually going to know what He's doing with our lives in the future, we come asking that He change those things because we believe we really know what we need. And if you would, think about the things that you most often come to the Lord with in prayer. Think about the times that you actually come to Him. It's most often when things start feeling like they're going out of control and you don't want them to go out of control. And so we come most often to ask Him to change the chaos into peace again, so that we can just continue on in the lives we've carved out for ourselves. And what we show, what is revealed in our hearts, is not a love for God in our coming to Him, but a love for our comfort. A love for a certain feeling of control of our lives. A love for God's stuff, not for Him. Now, I am not at all saying that God, in His grace, whenever we are in right relationship with Him, will not give us God-given comfort and peace and rest. God is gracious to give those things, but only when we align ourselves with Him. And brothers and sisters, He will be faithful to send trials to realign our lives. Which is why we should count them joy. Christians ought to see trials and tribulations differently than the world. There should not be an inconvenience for us. They should be joy. Now, having walked through trials myself, that's a hard one, right? It is not easy, as we talked about just a couple of weeks ago, it is not easy to look at trials as they are coming and be like, joy, yay. Give me another. It's not easy, folks. Trials are hard. Trials are given to us to work out of us our self-reliance that we've held on to our entire lives. Trials come to loosen our hands from the things of this world that we may hold on to Him. And brothers and sisters, that's hard for our natural tendencies. It's hard for us to let go of control that we've been working to get for our whole lives. Or at least our entire adult lives when we figured out that we got to do something. We don't just want to stay with mom and dad for our entire lives because they either won't let us or that's not an ideal condition. For some of us, we've worked hard to get to where we are, and we don't want to let go of that self-reliance and leave our future to God. And this is where we come to doubt. Or what James would define as doubt in our lives. When we think we know better, and God says He does. We become double-minded, or this word in the Greek, this phrase in the Greek could really be translated also as double-souled. S-O-U-L-E-D. There is a division within this person. Or on one side there is the assent that God exists, has power, has control, but then there is another side that still seeks selfishly to hold on to certain aspects of that. And brothers and sisters, that person, when they are divided, is not walking in any form of obedience. I don't care how good or moral the person may be. They are not walking in obedience to the God who demands our all. When we wrestle as to who should have control of our lives, brothers and sisters, we are doubting. It doesn't feel like that because we're not doubting God's existence. We're not doubting the thing that God says. We're just doubting that He actually knows what He's doing with our lives. We don't often say it like that. We don't often want to admit that to ourselves. But we also don't want to let Him have control. Because that's scary. Because He might do something that's uncomfortable for me. Right? He might ask me to do something that I really don't want to do. In my flesh. Not out of submission to Him, but rather in my flesh. And what we've done there takes us all the way back to verse 2. We have removed our joy from obedience and relationship with God, and we've put our joy in what He can give to us. What He can do for us. And so we're going to struggle to count it joy when we're doubting, aren't we? We're going to struggle to count the things that God has given to us, whether we wanted them or not, as joy because we think we know better than Him. Because we put our joy somewhere else. find it interesting. I love the picture that James gives us of this person who is the doubter, this person that is us, a lot of the time and a lot more time than we would like to admit, is like a wave of the sea, tossed to and fro. So many believers, so many people in churches would confess, if you gave them this picture, that this is what they feel their life is like. One day they feel they're doing okay. The next, they're down, they're depressed, they don't know what to do. They have this ebb and flow of emotions and feelings and not knowing where God is in it all because they don't see that they have set themselves afloat. They have unanchored themselves from God Himself, believing that they have somehow reached a point in their lives that God does not need to be in control. They've got it figured out. They can do this. We can do this. Contrast that with the person in verse 4. Let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Now, James is not so deluded that he believes that anybody has ever reached a point of being perfect and complete on their own, or even that they were able to stay there. Because both Christ, the apostles, in the whole New Testament, we are taught over and over again that, listen, be aware, be on guard, pay attention, because as soon as you feel like you're in the groove, God's going to put something in your life to continue to draw you back to Him, because you will forget Him. I don't mean forget Him like you don't think He's there, but forget that you need Him. Forget that He's the reason why you've been able to walk in a season of peace and joy and rest, even though things in your life may have gone crazy. It's like the people of Israel coming out of Egypt. How quickly did they turn back and say, we need to go back there because the food was better? They were enslaved. They were oppressed. They were a workforce for a rather oppressive regime. God delivers them by miracles. So not only do they get freedom, but they also plunder the Egyptians. They now got these riches. They have all this stuff, and then they just get hungry. And they forget what God has done. And they're ready to go back. Because at least there, they had comforts and they knew what to expect. Right? They were probably in their minds, there was probably the thought that, you know what? Slavery wasn't that bad. Because if we stayed right, we did the right things, they kind of just left us alone. We just did our work, received what we needed, and we're good to go. We had an army to protect us. We had a king to watch over us. We had good food. Man, remember that food? It was good. Better than this manna stuff. Brothers and sisters, that's us. And we like to try to convince ourselves that that's not us, but that's us. God does such a tremendous work in our lives by His grace. Sets us on a course that He has called us to and says just to trust Him, but we'd rather go back to when we didn't have Him. Didn't need Him. We so easily forget how much we need Him. and how He is enough for us. I've seen this in my own life in so many ways, but one in particular has happened about every 2 years. And that's my children. Like, man, we're really nailing it with 3. Oh, here comes another one? Finally get settled into 4 kids. Oh, there's another one coming? Yeah. Wait. Can't wait. Right? And then there's all those sleepless nights. I haven't slept in 10 years. Right? And you just feel like things get comfortable. And you get in a routine. That matters more to my wife than to me, but we get in a routine. And then here comes another one. Oh, yeah, and then by the way, you need to plant a church. And it's easy in moments where I'm selfish to look back and think, man, didn't we have it good with just 3? There are moments when I'm really being selfish. Man, didn't we have it good when we weren't? And I'm going to just, this is a level of honesty I don't know you get a lot from the pulpit. Wasn't it nice whenever I wasn't the lead pastor? Just the youth guy. Some of the biggest decisions I had to make was how much pizza to get. Brothers and sisters, please don't hear that I'm in any way disgruntled with being your pastor. But how easily do we turn back and idolize where God used to have us because we believe that our comfort, our happiness, our selfish desires matter more than what He has done or what we feel He's wanting to do and the next season He's bringing us to. See, when James commands us to count it all joy, and that if we can get that put our joy in God and in God alone, we don't need anything else but Him. That's the completeness that James is talking about. You don't need a better job. You don't need more money. You don't need fewer kids. You don't need a different spouse. What you need is Him. Now, God may, in His sovereign will and control over your life, change some of those things. He may change your job. He may work on things with you and your spouse. He may do a lot of things. But what you need more than any other thing is Him. Because only in Him. And when our joy is secure in the hope that we have in Him, only in Him will we find peace, rest, or anything else we need for our souls. Whatever your need is that you came in here this morning, He has the answer for it. He does. Him alone. Whatever that may be, He has the answer. You need nothing but Him. And as we talked about last week with Colton, as Colton led us through, we have this gap of wisdom. And as we know what wisdom is, as God teaches us, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Brothers and sisters, God will, when we ask, give us fear of Him. Now, we mean something very specific about that. Because that sounds like, why would we ask God for that? I don't want fear, I want peace. Here's the thing. We need to recognize power, sovereignty, and grace of God for our lives. Because only in the fear of the Lord does our understanding and our wisdom become diminished. We have to be so concerned that we are aligning ourselves with Him, that we are checking ourselves daily to make sure that we are with Him, we are seeking Him, we are looking to Him. Because as soon as we step off is when our lives begin to feel like the waves. Because He will be faithful when we walk away from Him to discipline us, to give us trials, to reveal where our joy really lies. He will be faithful to do so because He is a loving Father, and as Colton said last week, He gives good gifts to His children. Things for their good, even in discipline. He will be faithful to do so in order that we would come back. Brothers and sisters, you're feeling tossed. You're feeling like you're in the waves. You are the waves. Cry out to Him, but know when He comes and when He answers by His word through the power of His Spirit, He is going to expose your human wisdom as being wrong and off. And He's going to call you to trust His wisdom, His word, His truth. This is our faith. Not just faith that He exists. The demons have that, as James is going to share with us later in the book. The demons know Him to be powerful, know Him to be in full control, know Him to be sovereign. But they won't bend to worship Him. They won't bend to follow Him. Our faith is to be different than the faith of the demons. What we know to be true is to be different than theirs. Not only do we know that He exists and He's powerful, which anybody can see through creation, as Paul teaches us in Romans. David teaches us in the Psalms. Rather, our faith believes in what He has for us in the future, and that His way is the only way for us. We don't have an argument against His ways. We don't have a better way or a better option that we can present to Him and see if we can sell it to Him and hope that He'll change His mind. He has the better way. Hebrews chapter 6. Brothers and sisters, if this morning we are struggling with the doubt that James presents to us, if you feel often like your prayers in this times of ebbing and flowing and being tossed like the waves and trying to argue with God about what's supposed to come next, if you're feeling like your prayers are not being answered, if you feel like your prayers are just bouncing off the walls, they probably are. I know we don't hear that a lot in church, because we always want to talk about how God always just hears us and answers us. He does hear. God knows all of our prayers, but there will be times He does not answer until we come in the right way. It's important for us to know this. That we will constantly, before we come to the Lord with just our selfishness, that we come in a way that is worshipful and honoring to the God that we're coming to. We should not suppose, as James says, that we would receive anything from him at all. Anything. When we come in such a way. So, brothers and sisters, our call this morning is to come the right way. To come in faith. Not in what God can do for us. In the faith of trusting God for all things. All things. Trusting God for all things. Hebrews chapter 6. Verse 19. We have this, the sure and steadfast anchor of the soul. A hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. We have this being the work of Christ on our behalf. This being that Christ has accomplished for us what we could not do on our own. We have the righteousness of Christ that is imputed to us by God's grace, that is given to us by God's grace. This is what we have as an anchor for us. Because Christ, in his perfect life, his obedient death, and his victorious resurrection, perfectly did what we are then called to do, and that is submit ourselves to the Father. Trust his way over our way. So this is our sure and steadfast anchor. What's the answer for being tossed to and fro by the waves? An anchor. Something that holds us and keeps us. Brothers and sisters, our call this morning is to leave behind our understanding, our preferences, and to hold to him. And we do so by asking of him to help us. Asking for that wisdom to lead and guide us. Asking for that faith that we need to let go of our plans for our future, to let go of what we would like to decide for our lives, and trust him with what is ahead. As we've talked about, brothers and sisters, this counting it joy to be able to do so is not easy. It's not. It takes dying. As we see Paul mention over and over again in his letters, that we need to die with Christ. So that all of our selfishness, all of our planning, all of the things that we think we're smart enough in dies with that. That we may live with Christ. Brothers and sisters, this morning I want to give some space for you to communicate with the Father. Because some of us, we've come in this morning really wrestling with the decisions God has made for us. Really wrestling with what he has called us to and the path that he's asking us to walk. And some of us this morning, we've come in dragging with us our plans that we're demanding that he meet for us. we come in this morning feeling double-minded, divided to our very soul. And the call for us this morning is to come, trust him, put your faith in him, seek him. And we are never disappointed when that is our position. Because when we have him, we are complete. We lack nothing. So go to the Lord this morning. Go humbly, brothers and sisters. Take these burdens as we pray every Sunday. Take these burdens that you've carried of control of your life and lay them at his feet. He is gracious. He is waiting to receive you. Just going to have a time of quiet, and then we will continue on with singing